Hi, Aastha. Thank you so much for joining
Hi.
me today to have this conversation. As you know, it was World Mental Health yesterday, but we are meeting today to discuss some pertinent topics. And I would let you introduce yourself. So,
So thank you, Isha, for having me. And I think it's so funny that we've had to wait for so long to make this finally happen. But I'm glad we're here doing this. It's long overdue. And well, my name is Aastha Kottary. I am a mental health advocate. I am the founder and the host of a podcast called Slowdownwithaastha, where the idea is to encourage people to kind of slow down and kind of get out, find the space to move away from the chaos of daily life to pay more attention to their mental and emotional well-being, because that's something that I experienced the power of in my journey. And recently, I have also found the life-changing impact of neuro-coaching. I've been studying it, implementing it, and then sharpening my skills in that. So I'm studying neuro-coaching at the moment, and I hope really to be able to share those kind of tools with anyone, who is at least here in India. We're not taught mental skills, we're not taught resilience from a young age, we're not taught basic things like how do you cope with adversity in your life or emotionally difficult situations. And yeah, let's see where that takes me. But you know that now.
yeah.
So
Essentially, you're a mental health advocate. You've been doing a lot of advocacy. You have an award-winning podcast, Slow Down with Asta. So if any of you have not
yes,
heard it, please do. And so essentially, this is the first time I'm hearing of the term neuro-coaching. And maybe, so if you can shed some light on that and just explain to us what exactly it is and what approaches it implies. Like, yeah.
yeah. So neurocoaching actually deals very intensely with people's thoughts, their beliefs, and their belief systems, and as a consequence of that, their behavior. And very often, a lot of behaviors or self-limiting beliefs or self-doubt, critical thinking, spiraling into negative loops stems from certain unprocessed life experiences that people have. So the idea in neurocoaching, basically a lot of the principles are borrowed from NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm.
And you kind of make coach the person to sort of realize how they have their own mental makeup, their mental and emotional makeup, their framework, how they have become that person, or what are the life experiences that added to those thoughts, uh, and turn those thoughts that they had into strong beliefs that they have about themselves. And then you essentially give them the tools to understand how to challenge those beliefs in a way where it helps them to overcome that and bring out their best potential in the real world. That's the gist of what neurocoaching does.
That sounds like a mouthful, but I think that it has a lot of meaning in it. I want
Yeah.
to ask you specifically about, does it also deal with like trauma-informed approaches where you actually dissect what you might have been through in your childhood and try to make meaning of maybe why you are thinking a certain thought that might have a negative impact on your life? And is it more of like discussing with a coach and trying to find reasons for why someone is thinking that way, or is it simply trying to find the tools to get rid of those thoughts? If you know, like,
You do explore these things. Yeah, I mean, if the person has had an experience, any form of abuse, it could be physical, emotional, sexual, or any deep form of trauma and other ways that they have experienced in their life, we're not qualified to maybe diagnose and do the narrative or the talk therapy with them. But if that experience has played a role in further cementing a belief that they had about themselves, then we do address it. The approach is very flexible. Sometimes if a person doesn't want to talk about it, the approach is more to make them aware and give them the questions that they need to ask themselves about that situation to learn how it impacted them in the current day version that you are dealing with of them. So it's not the same as therapy as per se, or going to a trauma informed therapist. As a matter of fact, if we feel like it is really gripping the person's emotional present, we do make it very clear to them that it is also important for them to go to a separate therapist. But in neuro coaching, we address it. We give them certain tools with which they can maybe see what they learned from the experience or how it impacted them and how to move ahead after processing that.
So, what are some of the tools that, I mean, you don't have to list all of them, but maybe you could share one such tool that personally you find that is very effective in helping individuals cope.
I think the crux of it is when you finally coach them how to challenge the beliefs that they have. So once you have understood how this certain thought that you may have had in your childhood then had emotional intensity due to experiences which turned it into a very strong belief that you have about yourself, and you understand that equation, then it's more about principles of the brain, where you have to understand why the brain is actually scientifically wired to make you think in a negative manner, because it's actually supposed to, it's a survival instinct that kicks in off the brain. So how do you use the principles of, let's say, neurochemicals? And a lot of it is integration with even physical and spiritual health. We don't treat it as, we explain, for instance, when we're coaching someone, how do you take care of the neurochemical health of your brain? What do you physically do? Why the circadian rhythm matters? So all of those things together, and then teaching them how to challenge the belief. Let's say, for example, I really strongly believe that I am a failure. And every time I have, let's say, a toxic boss who tells me you're good for nothing or you're so silly, you can't do anything, it reinforces that. And I operate my entire life believing that I am a failure. um, Once you learn how to actually challenge it, find evidence in your life, use the principle of repetition of the brain to sort of convince your brain to challenge the belief, that to me is the most empowering tool that you can give someone to kind of hunt for evidence in your life that challenges the beliefs that you hold, which are holding you back.
Yeah, it sounds very much like what I have learned in my early childhood degree, especially in relation with adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. So it talks about certain things that might, impact a child, and when they become an adult, they don't really realize it until they actually self-reflect and say, oh, that might have added to my self-stigma, about
Yes.
myself and my self-view, my self-perception. And it often we don't reflect on those things because we kind of take it for granted how we perceive the world and how we have these negative thoughts about perhaps how
Yeah.
someone is telling a certain thing. But I guess my next question sort of leads me to asking you like how you came to wanting to do this work, and why you are so passionate about what you do.
So Isha, I mean, I think you'd relate to every word I say, because I think you're equally passionate about this, and whatever you're doing today is a very direct extension of your own experiences. And for me, to be very honest, in a very simple way, it was more like adulting. I was a child, that transition where you're a kid entering the real world, the big bad world. But I was very naive and innocent, and I was raised with the typical Indian belief ki bhai, beta, hard work is equal to success, be good to people and people will be good to you. So I think I entered this big bad world with very with beliefs about, or a certain maybe template of what I thought the real world would be like. And unfortunately for me, I think the first 2 years where you're kind of figuring out what you want to do with life, and you're exploring relationships, you're understanding yourself. It was just a disastrous 2 years in my life. Probably like that was the age of 20 or 21. Professionally, everything that I was doing was falling apart. I dealt with a lot of toxicity, and I was bullied a little bit because I used to play a lot of sports. So I was tanned all the time and I was very dark. So it made me feel not confident. Parallelly, in my personal life, my relationship completely broke down and I felt very cheated and I was unable to resolve or make peace with those feelings. And then my health took a very huge hit with my diagnosis of PCOS, that is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and thyroid. So I think those 2 years, it was just so much happening to me that was beyond my control, where I actually just had a very, very extreme existential crisis. I was questioning everything I knew about the world. I didn't know how to make peace with the fact that some things happen in your life that are way beyond your control. And I fell into what is very commonly basically a very strong victim mentality, feeling like life is out there to hurt you, nothing's going to go your way, you're just destined to fail, and this is, there's nothing to look forward to in life. It was a horribly um dark period for me because that's the first time I ever dealt with what is a feeling of absolute hopelessness. um but to my luck, my parents are very, very progressive and encouraging of things like reaching out and for help. And they noticed, I mean, I live with my parents, so they would notice that I was oversleeping, I was under eating, I was just randomly breaking down and crying. And even though I didn't know that you could take help for your mental health and that there's something called therapy and counseling, the first thing my mom and dad said is, look, there's something going wrong. We need to get you help. Let's do this. Let's figure it out together. And as I think in my recovery journey, if I could call it that, I explored, of course, I had certain therapists. I went for therapy. I liked it. Then it didn't work for me. I was parallelly trying to find answers in spiritual books. I was heavily reading on Hinduism. I turned to the Bhagavad Gita. I turned to Buddhism. Uh, Absolutely anything that would probably help me to pick myself up and make sense of life again. So those were a very difficult few years where I explored multiple tools. I went for hypnotherapy, I went for counseling, I was clinically diagnosed with depression and I was on medication for it. Um, so yeah, I think long story short, it's just a brutal 2 years of things not going my way and every aspect of life feeling like it was just falling apart for no fault of mine, and the inability to cope with that in a healthy manner. And over the years, of course, I've become so passionate about spending time with yourself. I think self awareness, as done to death as it sounds, is very, very important. Just spending time with yourself and figuring, where are these thoughts coming from? Have I felt this way earlier? Is there something else that's triggering this that I have not dealt with at an emotional level? Those basic skills, meditation, pranayam, breath work, eating correctly, getting my life together as a whole system really then made me feel the difference in my life. And I realized that, okay, we see mental health as just separate from physical health and separate from spiritual health. But in my experience, they're all very deeply interconnected.
Yeah.
And neuro-coaching was a tool I discovered in this process, which also profoundly changed um, my entire approach. Because you go for therapy once a week, but then the 6 days of the week that you're probably feeling like crap, if you don't have the tools to help you come out of that, that's when you start probably not feeling like therapy is going anywhere or doing any good.
Mm.
That's my journey.
I really like what you said about how the mind body are interlinked, and there is that term, I believe it was coined in Canada by research. I'm not able to recall, maybe but the concept of mind body and how the biomedical approach really looks at just trying to fix the brain or like the neurotransmitters, but really everything is related to the body and the mind, and what we really experience in our body is so interlinked and interconnected with our mind and all those processes. uh, but I do want to acknowledge that's very, I also went through that, and it's interesting how when you go through something like this, you kind of you seek help in places you might not have looked before. For example, even when I was not feeling well, I sought help in spirituality, in yoga, and all those things that you mentioned. Hinduism, Buddhism, all those things that I earlier did not even think of reaching out to. What is one aspect of Buddhism? I know that this is something that really speaks to you. So, what is one aspect of Buddhism specifically that you try to imbibe? Because I know it's so difficult to imbibe it in daily life. But what is one thing that you would say is on top of your list that you really want to uh, conquer?
I'd say acceptance. I
Hmm.
think the one most powerful lesson it has taught me is that more often than not, any form of suffering is a resistance, resisting accepting the situation fully.
Hmm.
And once you realize very, very deeply that truly nothing in your life is ever in your control, you may give your 100%, you may give your 2000%, but thereafter there is that element of, I have to let this go and accept that either the outcome will be in my favor or it will not, and either way, it's going to be okay. So I think acceptance.
I really like that a lot because at the end of the day, also the suffering is inevitable. So if we actually accept it, then we are not essentially getting as impacted by it as we would have otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share about your journey with doing the podcast? Once you started to really speak with other individuals, what was something perhaps that you might have discovered in that process of not only self discovery, but also finding out that there might have been other people going through similar experiences, and how that process was for you when you started to really reach out to the community and have these pertinent conversations?
Mm-hmm. So it's very funny. So I went through this whole turmoil. I told you about how I was unable to just grasp the fact that things were never in my control, no matter what I do, etc. And I dealt with that. And then I started a jewelry business. And just as things were taking off, the pandemic happened.
Mm.
And once again, it was so new. The whole world was struggling with it. No one knew what it was. The impact was devastating. We had a first wave, then we had a second wave, and it was one of those things where no one knew when this thing is going to end, or if it's going to end at all. And I found myself really back in the space where I was like, oh, again, one more thing in life that is not in my control, that hit me out of nowhere. But this time, for some reason, um it didn't sting so bad, because there was a part of me that said the whole world is dealing with this, right? It's not just me. So that sense of the victim mentality that I had felt earlier with my first mental health experience, if I may call it that, was not something I was experiencing this time, which to me was a fundamental realization of the fact that sometimes something may hurt less when you realize that you're not the only one going through it.
Mm.
And it was at the same time, I bumped into a friend when I was in the pandemic. We were grocery shopping and everyone was keeping distance. And I very clearly remember something where he asked me, hey, I think I've seen you. It's a friend's friend that I ran into. And I remember him very clearly saying, I think I've seen you outside so and so doctor's clinic. Are you going for therapy? And I said, yeah, a couple of years ago, I was going for therapy. Now, mind you, in India, I didn't realize what a big deal it is to say I'm taking help, because for my parents, they always normalized it for me in my house. All right. And he was so dumbstruck. He said, listen, that common friend of ours, if you ever meet her, please don't tell her you saw me, in the clinic, or that I go to this doctor and that I'm taking help because it's a big deal. And I remember thinking, why is this such a big deal? I don't know. I felt really bad for him. And I said, of course, I'm not going to like say anything. And I came back home and I actually asked my mom and dad, like, is it a really big deal that you guys have like encouraged me to go to a counselor and, go to a psychiatrist? And they very hesitantly said, yes. I mean, in India, it's not so, spoken about or, encouraged. And when I was going through my mental health bout in the pandemic, podcasts really helped me to sort of feel better. That's my first experience of actively listening to information, hearing two people talk, trying to, gain knowledge and implement it in my life. And I said, this is really powerful. I mean, considering that people don't talk about their mental health issue, they don't want to reach out for help. What if just listening to conversations could make them feel like one, they are not alone, and two, there is hope for them to pick themselves up and take certain action on their own. And that's where the idea of should I be doing this in India? Don't we need it? We were having, and we still are having, one of the largest mental health crises we have ever had in decades now. And it's very true that the system is under pressure. The demand and supply is crazy. The demand for therapists in India is unreal, and the supply is really, really nowhere close to the support that is needed. So this is, I wouldn't like to say that this is a replacement for anyone who actually should be taking help from a mental health practitioner. But somewhere down the line, I felt it was a very necessary move to just break the stigma in the first place.
Hmm.
So that's how it started, and then it picked up really well, and those things happened. And today, I've switched careers from jewelry, to this and dedicating myself to it. But that's essentially how it started, where I just realized that the pain is a lot less when you know you're not the only one, and that this needed to be acknowledged.
That's beautiful. That does sound a lot like my journey, although I took.
I want to actually ask you because I feel you have you when I read your book, to be honest,
Mhm.
Finding Order in Disorder, first of all, I really resonated at the level of I know how difficult it is to even go out there and say, I have dealt with this in my life, I've taken help for it, and these have been my experiences. So even before I ever spoke to you or called you or connected with you, when I came across Finding Order and Disorder and I read the book, part of me there itself felt that connect because it takes a lot of courage. I know you're in Canada and I don't know how different it is over there. I would love to know, is the stigma the same as what it is here? Are things better? Is it not such a big deal to talk about your mental health? And parallelly, now even you have this show, you have founded such a lovely nonprofit organization. You're studying and like upping your skills in terms of the educational part. And now though we're like parallel to each other, even you have fully committed yourself to the cause of mental health advocacy. So, how is that culture different? Because here in India, I mean, I've told you how, it's difficult to open up about it, but how has it been for you, given that our journeys are somewhat similar-ish, if I may say so?
Yeah, so I want to just start off with saying that I also lived like some part of my life in India. So I think guess I've been here about say
Mm.
7 years. Earlier I was in Canada between ages 12 and 18. Before that I was in India again. But my experiences of both the mental health system in back in India and here have definitely been different. I think that some few critiques of places in India where I live, especially after my divorce took place, might have been that there was no, in terms of nutrition, there was no like, and because your appetite would go up because of the medication, they would not really put a limit to how much they would serve you in terms of food. And that resulted in a lot of weight gain. And me being an artist and a dancer, that was very important to me at that time. So that and that also takes a toll of your self-esteem, when you gain weight and when
Yeah,
you go through all of that, how people
yeah,
perceive you as at the anyways perceiving you through a lens because you're on medication and you're sick. And at that time, of course, I went through a divorce as well. So there were all these layers of stigma, and there was so much interpersonal stigma, but at the same time there was a lot of self-stigma. So I think it all of that made it a lot harder. But when I talk about comparing the East and West and the approaches to mental health stigma and having these conversations, let me tell you that there is a lot of stigma here as well. I believe the only difference here would be that people talk about it on the surface, but then maybe inside and behind your back, sometimes they say something different, but it's still talked about at least. And so that's the positive side. We have non-profits and fundraisers For example, there's film festivals that take place that and I know there are film festivals in India as well, which are devoted to mental health only. Just yesterday, I had gone to Rendezvous with Madness Film Festival, and one of my films is screening there, which I had done with help of my mom. So, which is a monologue, exploring themes such as feminism, patriarchy, and uh, domestic abuse. But essentially, conversations are had here, but inherently there are issues. If I may give a trigger warning, so if anyone wants to take like maybe a 2-minute break and come back, the kind of things that take place in and still do take place in emergency units here where people admit themselves in, whether it's due to alcoholism or drug addiction. Because, mind you, drug addiction and alcoholism is clubbed together with mental health. So even someone going through a mental health condition who might not be going through the addiction, is basically they're living together, and then they're being treated together. So firstly, there's one aspect of uh, isolation where they put away individuals who are extremely elderly, who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, who are racialized, and they put them away in a room. That's one aspect. The other is there's coercion and there's restraints, which is like essentially what it means is they hold you down with your ankles and your wrists. And the reason I'm having these topics is not to trigger anyone or to not to like make it a big drama, but really to normalize these conversations and shed light on things that are currently taking place in places that in hospitals that have possibly the most amount of government funding. And I'm not taking any names here. This is taking place in Canada. There are a lot of advocacy groups that are, advocating against this treatment. But we have to remember that there's a very, very deep history which is entrenched within our. I mean, first you obviously talk about the history that the indigenous people went through, right? And that in itself is just it's you one cannot digest that when you hear about the atrocities that the women, children, and went through, and all that intergenerational trauma. That itself is just not able to be digested. But then you talk about how people who have been through mental health issues have been treated in this country, and they were essentially put away for the rest of their lives, and they never saw the light of day back then. They were just put away, and they would breathe their last breath in that institution. And so they were called asylums. The first asylum, I believe, in Ontario was in somewhere in the mid 1800s, and that same asylum now has become a Ontario police like the center, which is like basically so imagine the kind of atrocities that took place at that time, and it's the history that is embedded. So basically, that building is made underneath an entire graveyard of people and unmarked graves of people who have suffered from mental health issues. So the people who have been through this associate themselves, some of them, as being mad, and there's mad studies in this community. And we have now a very, very intense situation happening with our society currently, especially in Ontario, about the whole politics of power and dynamics and capitalism, especially in relation to policing free schools. So you know how there's that so
Mm-hmm.
much of uh, you know ha- having that power over people, and especially children. So imagine now children are going to see so many more police officers on campus, and these officers are viewed as a sense of safety, but what ends up happening is
Yeah.
there's so much surveillance and everything, and this is impacting directly children and probably even educators who already are going through so many mental health issues. So all these things are being perpetuated so much. Um, so I think the issue is much deeper because there's so many things that people don't talk about. For example, I would have never even imagined in my worst imagination that this kind of thing when actually happens until it happened to me. You know, it's like you don't know what death means when somebody close dies. You don't know that because we live in this la la land that where we think we'll never ever die.
Yeah,
But when we
yeah.
lose someone, we realize that those kind of things happen. So
Hmm.
it's so deep because there's so many things that it's like there's so many layers of things that are happening that are interconnected, but it's a very historical and intergenerational trauma that is kind of passed on from generations. But you, at the end of the day, have to look at how all these systemic issues are embedded within our political systems, school systems, hospitals, community organizations. And at the end of the day, you ask yourself how much funding are these institutions really getting to address real mental health issues? Because back then you
Hmm.
talked about supply and demand, and actually, uh, in comparison, I'm sure that we are not having as much of a gap between supply and demand, given the population and socioeconomic status of most citizens in India. But when you compare
Hmm.
it to here, we are also facing that. So what ends up happening is people come in, they get treated for some time, they let go, and then because there's people who are going through uh, worse situations, and they're prioritized. But then the person who has been discharged from an institution ends up falling sick again because essentially they have not even recovered. So then you have this constant cycle and this vicious cycle of being discharged, and so coming to that, the system, although it aimed to help me, I think I really try to help myself with that, where I try to do a lot of therapeutic arts. And with my mother we did that film Unfinished. And even my brother would film my dance, and I would do a lot of yoga because I did a course in Yoga Institute from Mumbai, and I got my teacher training certificate. So I would do a lot of yoga and
Hmm.
pranayam, like you right said. So I think the approach we have to really take is a collaborative and community approach, as opposed to just a biomedical model where we're popping pills and just focusing on what possibly is happening in our brain, because it's much more than that. So, sorry, I went on a spiel, but
Not at all. No, it's so interesting because the other day I met someone and from the UK, and they were telling me, oh, okay, you're into mental health, and my sister in the UK is a therapist, and so we were talking about the difference in perception when it comes to the UK and in India. And though each country has its own challenges, maybe culturally, maybe like for instance in Asia, everyone is dealing with being burnt out, overworked, doing multiple jobs because the world has become expensive and no, there's no work-life balance. It's so interesting to study how each country has its own unique challenges. And at the same time, at a global level, the world is dealing with very similar challenges in terms of at least work culture, like inability to be able to have a healthy work life balance or healthy outlets, etc. And at least in India, what I'm noticing now with the new generation is they're very proactive. They want to take help for their mental health, even if the family does not believe that mental health issues are even a thing. And what I feel really bad about is, at least in India, one struggle which I would love to know if that is something that happens in Canada, is that there's no awareness. For instance, even if I notice the behaviors of people in my group, um, I think what they are dealing with at the core is sadness, but there's no awareness of the fact that, okay, this sadness is going on for too long, and now that it has crossed a certain mark of 2 to 3 weeks, maybe it could be a subtle depression. Should I take help? Because you're always surrounded by people who say, Are you just need to get out for a holiday, Are pee le, come party and you'll be fine. So that fundamental awareness, like when I talk to people abroad, I think that basic awareness is there where they recognize that, okay, what the state of mind I'm in right now is something I should be taking help for. It's not normal, it's not healthy. But in India, we're struggling at that level itself.
Yes, yes.
We're giving bro advice to people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we're doing these juvenile things, which is changing,
Yeah.
of course. And yeah, that's just my observation of how, like, each country has its own unique challenges, but then at a global level, there is that sense of community because we're also all living in similar times with similar threats of like job or security or oppression or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like I enjoyed hearing what you were saying, because to me it just makes me realize, okay, wow, that's a completely different set of problems from what we have here in India in the same line of in the same field. And one thing I really want to ask you, because I know you have told me in personal conversations about how much dance and dance as a form of therapy uh, means to you, what a huge role it has played in your life. If I'm not mistaken, you're even studying therapeutic arts, if that's how you say it, or I don't know the technical word.
Yeah,
So, I
yeah.
mean, I really think that these things are very powerful and in helping people to, you know, maybe find an outlet. So, how has dance really played its role in your mental health journey?
Yeah, so I always was drawn to dance and arts. When I was a teenager, I did a lot of Latin dance as a child. I did Kathak, and then I started it again when in my teen years, and finally I did that the performing arts degree from in Pune from my guru Pandita Manisha Satheji, and I for me, I sincerely believe that dance was a way of life, and that
Yeah.
way of life I resorted to more of I did it every single day as a riyaz, as a not as really as a means of escape, but as a means of coping to get well and to make meaning of life in that moment. Because think about it, if you are in an institution, specifically during COVID, you're away from your family. In some cases I could not even really talk to that many people. I was in places where there were just two or three people, and they were very highly what medicated, if you will, or going through issues such as violence, or there have been like I'll give you an example. So there was a nurse who came up to me that, and she said, oh, there is that girl who, just stay away from her because she's extremely abusive and violent. She just, hit someone and beat someone up in the other unit. So these were the kind of things that I was dealing with. But I I still didn't view her from that lens, you see, because what ends up happening is when you live in a place like that, people are, if someone does something or if someone is triggered, then they're viewed with that negative lens. So I just approached, and she approached me, and then I said, oh, I do dance, I do yoga. So you share these positive things. And you won't believe it. Her and me, we used to do yoga together. She saw my dance videos. So now you tell me the same person who was viewed as someone who has, like as a
Who was a
violent
danger, a
streak,
proper
a
threat. Yeah,
danger.
yeah.
So it all depends on how the society, in my eyes, views a certain person through an ableist lens. And there's so much cynicism, and that basically is the othering of people who are diagnosed with mental health disabilities. We cannot treat each other like that. There has to be some compassion and there has to be some empathy. So coming to your point of therapeutic arts, I always was a dancer, and yoga helped me a lot too, to basically uh, use that energy that I had, because sometimes I would not get proper sleep, and my rhythm was interrupted, and obviously I had other ways of coping with it, because a lot of people get sucked into the um, things such as like alcohol, weed, and
Yeah.
other drugs, which I don't really know the name of. But regardless, we know there are drugs out there which are very, very harmful, not just to the body, but it can create a maybe a I'd say like a temporary relief, but then the long-term impacts of it can really result in a lot of addiction and uh, repetitive cycles. But dance for me helped me a lot because I always had it in me because I would always dance. But the beauty of that was that when I was doing the dance, for example, even when I was in and out of rehab and when I would do these dance videos, which actually are all on my YouTube channel currently, so people, they have absolutely no idea that I'm actually going through something. I'm doing those dance videos, excepting for maybe a couple where, that where I have that energy and I'm not able to, really emote it or something. But there is rhythm, there is musicality, there are expressions, and the movement is, I mean, there's no like, you can't even tell that there's something maybe off or that maybe I might be going through something. And I think that that's the beauty which is lies in all these expressive arts such as dance, painting, even yoga, because in that moment, and I don't need to sound very like cliche about this, but I really found my order and disorder in that moment, and it seemed just as if there was nothing wrong in that moment. It took me away from the environment I was in, the way I was being perceived by my immediate society, the heavy amount of over medication that took place. And talking about over medication, I was put on so much medication at one point. They were testing, what would work. I really thought I would pass away. I thought that was the end of it for me, and that's when they let me go home because my entire body, I was feeling something really crazy, and I said, "What is happening?" I mean, they're just giving me all these kinds of crazy medication, and the worst part was my family. What could they do? A, it was COVID. B, I was in that place, which apparently is the most highly funded place, and this country depends on it extensively when it comes to mental health well-being. But it was a very, very bad situation, there was and I realized at that point, obviously, globally, we were going through COVID, and so I think there was a lot of pressure on uh, not just the mental health system, but also
The healthcare system
system.
itself, I
Healthcare
think.
system
Yeah,
itself was going through issues. I mean, if I'm just
yeah, yeah.
so it's just like someone would say, oh, okay, like this is not even as important, Here people are dying. I mean, I lost my uncle, Papa, due to COVID, so I understand the gravity of the situation, and I completely understand that. But I think that we were not prepared for something like this, and now that it happened, I don't know. I mean, there's these we can always look in hindsight into saying what we could have done right, and what how we could have maybe dealt with it, but we were not prepared because there was just so much understaffing and so much burnout, so much exhaustion of the care sector, of the nurses, of the doctors, and of the counselors. It was everyone was going through emotionally such a horrible time during that time. And but I want to sort of steer away from that and come to our support system. So I'm grateful for the support system. Like even you had mentioned, our family system and our kinship and our support circle is so important. So if you could also share something and how that kind of helped you, and just because we need to really highlight the importance of that, and let's also highlight that not everybody's like biological family is family can be chosen family too, you know.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah. So, Isha, earlier we spoke about how people, if they're not taught healthy coping mechanisms, they might turn to drugs or alcohol or porn addiction, or there's some outlet they need to sort of numb the pain. Um, in a case, what I notice over here is when you have a healthy support system, be that your family that you live with, your friends who may encourage you and say, look, let's sort this out together, let's take you to the therapist or find someone. I feel in those cases, people tend to not turn to unhealthy things like drugs and alcohol to numb the pain because they have a support system that is showing them and having their back while taking the right way to come out of it. And consequently, I noticed that when there are people around who are from families where, mental health is not even a thing, or you're imagining it, it's all in your head, just pick yourself up, it's okay, stop cribbing. People have that kind of an approach to the child, talking about what they're feeling, that you can't help but expect the person to find some other way to numb the pain, because reaching out to a mental health practitioner is not an option for them, either because the family doesn't support it or they're too young to do it on their own and they're not an adult. You need to pay for therapy, so it's easy to fall into bad company and make poor coping choices. At least that's what I've noticed here in India, because that itself is a struggle. In my case, I can't tell you how much it's not just the first time. For instance, if I had to be really honest, I've had experiences where I've gone for therapy, I've not found it helpful, so I've stopped going. And when you're in a sort of a weird headspace, you kind of do your own trial and error. Like in between, I remember, I should not be saying this, but I know many people do it. I just stopped my medication because I said, this is making me feel like crap. It's not doing me any good, and I didn't want to go back to the psychiatrist. But each and every time that I was on the cusp of giving up on therapy or saying, this doesn't work, my life is over, it's finished, each and every time my family said, no, it's okay, we'll find you someone better. No, it's okay, we'll take you somewhere else. No, okay, if this is not working for you, let's try hypnotherapy. We haven't tried that earlier. Do you want to find? So that support where they never gave up on me, even when I kind of was turning my back multiple times and saying, I'm done with this, I'm done with this. I can't even tell you, because, when you're in a very toxic headspace, you sort of want something to work quickly because you're that desperate. Even taking help in that moment is such a big deal. And so sometimes you have an unrealistic expectation. Maybe 2 sessions into therapy, you feel like your life should feel like it has changed, and it's not, because it's coming from a place of desperation to I want to feel better. So you give up more easily because your expectations itself are not right from the start. And it's so important to have someone who kind of holds you accountable in a loving way, in a polite way, doesn't give up on you, and in their own little way tries to show you that there will be light at the end of the tunnel and that they will not give up on you. And I think, I mean, though we may discuss the mental health scene in Canada, in India, or globally, I think the one thing we can say, which is a universal requirement, is a strong support system.
100.
And I think you have been blessed to have that in your journey. I have been blessed to have that in my journey. And I really don't know how much I would or would not have been able to come out of that headspace had I not had that.
Yeah, that's very pertinent. And I know there are some people, I mean, there's actually a lot of people out there who don't have these support systems. But if we're having this discussion and having this hypothetical situation where we actually talk about people who do not have these support system, it is important to not feel that shame. And I know that in that moment it's very difficult to really reach out. But support can come in many ways, even if it's finding support in, say, a podcast or in a pet, or talking to a
Mm.
stranger sitting in a park, or looking at nature and just looking at that water and looking at trees, or anything that you're passionate about, but making that effort to reach out. And I know sometimes it's very difficult, especially when you're going through something as where you don't feel like stepping out at all. Like, who is going to, you don't, like, I have had times in my life where I've just, I've had to just not feeling like doing anything. But how do we deal with that situation? I just want to hear your viewpoint on it. I will also add to it that discussion, but We, because I think that's the challenge, right? It's because of course the people who go through something and have those support systems, but we're really trying to have those discussions for people who do not have the support system. So how may people create those support systems for themselves within the community that make them feel safe and like they belong, so that these kind of situations do not come up. You know, they have someone to rely on.
I feel that what I at least notice is happening over here, which is something to do with the evolution of social media and the online world. Though I do have a love-hate relationship with social media, I have to acknowledge that the one good thing it has done is it has helped people to kind of find, if I could call it, a peer group for very specific causes. So, for instance, I see that a lot of earlier postpartum depression was not a thing. Today, we've identified it. We know women are aware of the fact that, oh, if I am feeling this way, the chances are that I am, experiencing postpartum depression. So, number one, at a fundamental level, I think awareness and teaching people what are the red flags that you should look out for X, Y, or Z is very important in helping them to recognize that, okay, what I'm going through is probably this. The second step is, I feel that if your immediate family or your close friends are not very encouraging of this whole thing of taking help or whatever, I'm happy to notice that a lot of people now in Bombay have peer groups where they meet up. Right from, like, I have a friend who recently told me, I felt very isolated because I have type 1 diabetes. And today I've joined this very big group of women in South Bombay and Bombay. And we just meet and just make each other feel better. We discuss any new information we have, we share tips. And it's that sense of community, right? So I see a lot of mothers doing this who are experiencing postpartum depression where they just connect with each other on social media or have Facebook groups and then they meet in person. And they do very beautiful activities, like they may meet in person and do like a coffee brewing workshop together. But it's that sense of bonding. Maybe sometimes you don't even have to address that we are all going through this, but it's just that sense of support that, okay, here's a group of women who identify with me and are going through the exact thing that I'm going through. So I feel that awareness is very important, one. And two is the best thing that you can do in such a situation if you don't feel that sense of support from your immediate environment is to sort of reach out to local peer groups, which are probably very specifically going through the thing that you are going through or the life situation that you are going through. And of course, um, today with the internet you have so many resources. Like just the other day, I tried my best to put out on World Mental Health Day yesterday a list of resources of therapy, which is pay what you can therapy, therapy which is quality therapy at an affordable rate, companies that are doing great work, NGOs that are doing, like, work in India where you can reach out to them and say, look, I can't afford to pay but I'm willing to take the help. So it's important to look up resources and to be aware of what your options are, even if you don't have a support system that may tell you, please go for therapy. That's just my opinion on it. But for me, I really feel that ideally, in an ideal world, I would love to have just be able to eradicate that problem of people not taking mental health seriously enough that they would even go to the extent of denying the help to someone who's reaching out to them. So I think that's the real problem that I would hope that work that you do, work that I do, uh, can play its role in eradicating that problem.
Um,
But what is your opinion? Because that's just, I mean, my opinion comes again from the lens of what I notice in India, what I notice about people's mentality here, and chances are maybe that's not the case at all in your surroundings. So how does this work? How what's your ideal solution to this?
yeah, so for me, I try to follow until recently, and I still try to do that, is like I have this kind of, I believe in the collaborative care model, and essentially what it is
Mhm.
whether, and I believe this model can be applied to even people who are not going through mental health as a preventative measure, because for me, always prevention is better than cure. especially when it comes to mental health, because we all have mental health issues, and so this model essentially says you have two, three people whom you always rely on, as whether it's friends
Mm-hmm.
and so basically because we are social being, we need that sense of community. And more often than not, if you have at least one or two people who you can really rely on, whether you're making a big life decision or you're going through something where you can really openly discuss with them without the fear of being judged or being you cannot mask yourself, you cannot hide yourself, you can
Yeah,
be, if you
yeah,
can be
yeah.
authentic with someone and have that level of authenticity with someone, and if you have that authenticity with more than one person, you're blessed. And three would be absolutely ideal. So that then you can kind of ask maybe all three of them. You have that kind of framework when you're going through
Mhm.
something. And if all of them maybe are like, that maybe I don't know if that's a good idea. So for me, I kind of rely on that. For me, my system is the one that I rely on now extensively are my partner, my mother, and my father. Yeah, and that's obviously my, we're talking about kinship and my immediate family. But the ones who don't have that, it really could be anybody that they can talk to, whether it's a community worker or it's a friend or it's somebody that you meet while you are doing like in transit, on a weekly basis. And we need to, there is a lot of fear of rejection, right? That is, I think, the number one fear that humans have, and it's been proven by science. So,
Mhm.
but what has also been proven by science is the people who live the longest are the ones who have healthy relationship. So I think we need to work from an approach of having those healthy relationships so that we may not have mental health issues. And even if we have mental health issues, because I think at some level that's something that we cannot avoid altogether, it will
Yeah, yeah,
at
yeah.
some level
It's
take place.
inevitable.
It's inevitable, especially in this kind of toxic culture that we have created for ourselves today. And but we also need to take, it's also a journey within ourselves. We need to self reflect. We need to, I believe a lot of answers also lie in our early childhood, between the ages of 0 to 6. We need to look at perhaps what trauma might have been caused in during that time, or maybe after that time, and actually like deal with it and let it go, because a lot of the time we hang on to a lot of stuff on our shoulders. I know I did. And the moment I let go of it, not only was it good for me, but it helped my mental health situation. Because if I hang on to it, really, I'm the only one being impacted by it. I'm having all those thoughts
Yeah.
about what I might have gone through, and you play the blame game where it's like it's so and so's fault and so and so's fault. But when you really peer inside, you say that, this the only thing you can do is let go in that moment. And then it's very difficult to let go, especially when you've been hanging on to something for decades. But the the moment you let go, you realize that there's no turning back, because it is so freeing, that process. It's just, you would never
We
ever want
spoke
to hang
earlier
on.
about acceptance, and
Yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
that's
You
it's
just,
it's two sides of the same coin. You have to
yeah,
accept it, and I think as an extension, what you have said, you have to let go of it,
yeah, yeah.
right? I also, in between you said something about, we were talking about your love for dance and how it has really helped you, expressive arts, um, and all of these tools. I feel when I used to read really intensely about mind-body connection, and for me, I think journaling is something I rely on. I need, there's something about holding a pen and just writing your feelings out that kind of gives you a bit of a channel to let it out of the body, right? Um, and I was reading scientifically that any form of art or any skill you take up, it could be gardening, it could be pottery and making something with your hands, it could be cooking, it could be dancing, painting, anything that you do physically where you are sort of, it's almost like a meditative experience. Um, it's very important because that is a form of you really letting that energy go. You're like transmuting the energy, and instead of internalizing those feelings or emotions or experiences, you're giving it the outlet to sort of release itself. And just funnily, I want to mention one thing, that when I was diagnosed with PCOS and thyroid, etc., and I remember it was so harrowing because I was running from gynac to endocrinologist, and I was being blasted with like medications and stuff, and I was just not feeling myself. I was gaining weight, which was worsening how I was feeling about myself, and it was such a dirty this thing. And one in one book I remember, and one tarot card reader, as funnily as it is, she told me, she said, "Listen, I just you've suppressed a lot of emotion, and when you do that, your throat glands
Hmm.
are directly impacted." And it sounded like woo-woo to me. At that time, I was very, oh, this is pseudoscience. What's the connection? And I was just like, this is nonsense and stuff. Then I just went back home and I said, let me read more about this thing. And then I read and I read, and that's how I started reading about mind-body connection. And you won't believe it, Isha, like ever since I took up to writing my feelings out, because sometimes it is true. There are situations in life where you can't tell something to someone directly, or there are you don't know how to process it. And to me, today, I'm at a point where I'm on no medication. My T3, T4, TSH is normal. I have corrected my lifestyle, and I have seen that I don't need medication anymore. Whereas at the age of 21 and 22, I was like, my mornings was pills, my post lunch, pre lunch. And today, I don't need any of that. So when it comes to, teaching people healthy ways to cope with their feelings, healthy ways to channelize their emotions, and realizing the power of its impact if that is not let out in a healthy manner. I feel those are the things that I'm very passionate about today, and I would love to be able to maybe in some way be a part of creating that kind of a change for the new generation. And I want to ask you the same question. What do you feel about, if there's one thing you're very specifically passionate about when it comes to creating change for the future, what would that be?
That's a very good question. I think that, well, I would fall back to that sense of community and that sense of love that we have for each other and compassion. We need to be more honest with ourselves and with each other, and we need to feel safe, because I think a lot of the time these emotions come inside of us because we don't feel safe with each other and we cannot be our true selves with each other. If we can create a community, and that starts with being true to ourselves and true with each other and honest with each other, and really having those social connections and surrounding ourselves with positivity, and not being afraid to even say no. If there's something negative in your life and you want to cut it out of your life, it's okay to do that. Having boundaries, I think all these
Yeah.
things really, really are very important, and we underestimate them too often. And I just want to, on that note, kind of maybe suggest that maybe next time we talk, we can um, you can I would love it if you share, but this will be for our next session, if you can share how you've gotten off those medications, because I also have thyroid and PCOS. So
Oh, wow.
and I'm seeing endocrinologists and all the doctors for that, and I'm been still on
Hmm.
medication for that. So I would be very keen to know how you got off, but we'll keep that for our next talk. And I
Done.
think we've gone over an
You're
hour.
already an author, so I'm guessing you've already written out your feelings because you have a
No,
book to
see,
your name.
that in itself, that was also like an art form, right? That was a journaling, and I
Yeah, yeah,
having
yeah.
having I'm looking forward to your book now. I don't know if you're already working on it, but yeah, well,
No, not yet.
I would be very keen to, get a glance at your journaling. It would be so nice, because I'm sure you
Yeah,
have
I
some
can imagine.
incredible things to say. You can, yeah. We're gonna talk more about that. But thank you so much,
In
everyone.
round two.
Yeah, thank
Thank you,
you.
Isha.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And wishing you a happy World Mental Health Day. I think more power to us. Like honestly, I'm so proud of the work that we're doing in our respective countries or whatever, in our own little way, whatever we're trying to do. And anyone who is just trying to do whatever they can to break the stigma, to talk more about it, to offer help, to genuinely, empathize with people who are going through these challenges in life. More power to anyone and everyone who is doing that in their own small little way, even if that is just, checking up on a family member and reassuring them that, hey, I mean, I'm there for you if you need me. So I think change could start with something as small as that. And thank you for this conversation.
And also having a listening ear, because often that's all that people need. I mean, you don't have to give solutions to people, you
Yeah,
can just hear them out. Even that is fine.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Aastha, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
take care. Bye.
Take care. See you.